Welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast.
Hello there from Bedford. How are you all? Are you having a great weekend? I'm just prepping for the Liverpool Man City game. Can't wait for this. Any of you football fans know this is a massive game. Anyway, welcome to the What Bitcoin Did podcast, which is brought to you by the mighty Kraken, the best place to buy, sell and trade Bitcoin. I'm your host, Peter McCormack, and today I've got a bonus interview, a show I recorded in LA with Cedric Dahl, talking about dark markets as an indicator of Bitcoin adoption. But before that, I do want to give a quick shout out to all my amazing sponsors. And remember, don't skip the ads. Check them out. It is the sponsors who allow me to make this all happen. So first up, the mighty Kraken, the best exchange in the world with spot, futures, margin trading and their OTC desk. They've got all your trading needs covered. They've also just launched their mobile app, which gives you real-time pricing, charting, order book display and trading while you are on the go. With security in their DNA, it is the only place you should be trading. So join me in supporting Kraken by heading over to kraken.com, which is Kraken.com. Also, BlockFi, the future of Bitcoin and financial services. They've got their crypto-backed loans and crypto interest accounts, of which I am a customer. They've also removed a minimum deposits for this. So to find out more, head over to blockfi.com, which is BLOCKFI.com. Next up, Dropbit, the best mobile wallet for Bitcoin. With Dropbit, you can text and tweet Bitcoin to people. They now support Batch32 addresses and Lightning, and you can now buy Bitcoin directly in the app with Apple Pay and Google Pay. It's available for iPhone and Android. Just head over to dropbit.app, which is DROPBIT.app, and Wire, who offer your users an easy and fast way to purchase Bitcoin. They take care of all the heavy lifting in terms of compliance, payments, and liquidity. So to find out more, reach out to Wire or create a developer account at sendwire.com, which is SENDWIRE.com. And lastly, Consensus 2020 is coming up, bringing together the who's who in the crypto community in New York. They always manage to bag the best speakers available, from Andrew Yang to Hester Pierce to Brian Armstrong. The list goes on. Register now for the lowest price of the year. They will never be lower than $999 again. This price expires on the 13th of December at midnight, so use the code WhatBitcoinDid, and the first 50 people to register with the code will receive a limited edition swag bag. Visit consensus2020.com, which is CONSENSUS2020.com. Okay, so onto the interview with Cedric Dahl, who's from 1000X, and you know what, I get a lot of people reach out to me. It's like maybe 30, 40 times a month, people messaging me via the website or dropping me an email and saying, look, can I come on the show? Or I've got this person who want to come on the show, and it's 99% of the time it's a no, because they just want to shill some bullshit project or token or something I'm just not interested in. But when Cedric reached out to me, he just sent me a whole bunch of interesting data about dark markets and research he's been doing. And as this was my entry into Bitcoin, I was super interested. So, you know, we talked about it for a few months. And when I was in LA last time, we agreed to meet up and make a show. I haven't actually used a dark market in quite a long time. The last time was when I wanted to purchase something for my mother when she was seriously ill and wanted to purchase her treatment. But I'd made this assumption that it would be privacy coins that people would be using. Maybe not primarily, but I assumed there would be a lot of use of things like Monero. So to me, it was quite surprising that actually it's mainly Bitcoin that's being used. But with censorship resistance being a primary feature of Bitcoin and having deep liquid markets, it kind of makes sense when talking about this with Cedric. So in the show, we get into dark markets. We talk about staying as private as possible using Bitcoin and states bypassing sanctions using Bitcoin. And also, we do get into censorship resistance. It was a really interesting chat. So very grateful to Cedric for reaching out to me. And yeah, if you've got any questions about the show, you know, as ever, you can reach out to me. It's hello@whatbitcoindid.com. I am back off to the States on Wednesday. Can't wait. Final plans getting together. I'm going to hit as many cities as possible, but I'm still scheduling interviews. But it looks like I'm going to possibly be in Boston, New York, Ohio, Indianapolis, San Francisco, LA, Hawaii, Texas, and Washington. It's going to be a mammoth trip. So many cool interviews coming up. If you're in those cities and I get a chance to organize a meetup, hopefully I will get a chance to catch up with you. Anyway, got any questions, feel free to hit me up. Otherwise, have a great rest of your weekend, and let's hope Liverpool smash City today. Morning, Cedric. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on here.
No problem at all. Listen, I don't normally accept requests for people to come on when people actually ask me, and I get a lot. I get like 20 maybe a week, and it's just always just a no, same rules as ever, because I'm not really interested in what they're trying to pitch. Usually it's a pitch for a company or whatever, and they want to take advantage of it. But instantly, when you started talking to me about dark markets, I'm like, well, this is how I got in. So, I don't know how much you know about my background, but
I haven't heard about this.
oh, wait. So this is when people are like, "Well, how did you get into Bitcoin?" I was like, "Well, I was buying cocaine on the Silk Road. I was I've never lied about it. I was a yeah.
Sorry, that's great.
Well, I am, but like I'm a drug addict in recovery, 5 years clean. I've not touched it since. But that was my introduction. One of my friends was like, "Oh, there's this website where you can buy drugs online." I was like, "What?" He was like, "Yeah, it's called the Silk Road." I was like, "How the fuck do you do that?" He's like, "Well, you have to get this thing called Bitcoin." I was like, "What the fuck is Bitcoin?" So I went down this like little rabbit hole, was buying the best cocaine I'd ever could get, and yeah, that's how I got into it. And then obviously, long story, but I had a very bad incident with it, so I stopped taking drugs. But when my mum got sick and we wanted to get her cannabis oil, and my dad was like, well, how do we do this? And I was like, well, remember I had that cocaine problem? Well, there's this website, and the Silk Road wasn't still then. It was like Sheep Market. What was it?
Okay. Yeah, there've been plenty.
Yeah. So whatever it was, I used, and yeah. But then obviously I haven't taken drugs in 5 years. So ever since my mum passed, I've got no idea what's going on with dark markets. So it's a big long intro for me, but I'm really interested to find out from you. But people might not know you as well as some of my other guests, Cedric. I think that's fair. So should we do the intro? Tell them about you.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, congratulations on being sober for several years. That's a big deal. And congrats.
Yeah.
My start with crypto and Bitcoin is actually pretty similar to yours. So it's 2009. I had just left my soul-crushing job at Microsoft. I had done like a little startup that worked well enough that I was able to like escape the golden handcuffs. Because really I was like, in 2008 I was getting ready to kill myself. I hated my job. I hated working for this big company. I hated like that all the people I was working with were just warming seats. So do this experiment. It works. And my friend and I who we escaped Microsoft together, we go ahead and start this little hacker house. And it's in this hacker house in 2009 that my friend Bennett is like, yo, there's this thing called Bitcoin. We should like mine some of it. And I'm like, nah. Crazy internet money? Like, this is never going to work.
I think a lot of people have that reaction. Anyone who I hear when they go, oh, yeah, I read about this Bitcoin thing and then I read the white paper and it just made sense to me. The likes of like Eric Voorhees. I'm like, how? But, it does to them. It just didn't to people like you and me. We're like, what?
It did not work at all on me. And in fact, to Bennett's credit, every single month for the next year, he would nudge me with different reasons why we should like pay attention to Bitcoin. And it wasn't until 2010 when Bennett brought up the Silk Road that I finally understood it. So he's like, hey, Cedric, now you can buy drugs with Bitcoin. And I was like, what? That got my attention because, I had been raised by Jewish grandparents who had survived the Holocaust.
Right.
And they had like programmed my young brain with all these stories about like, hey, all of your stuff might get taken away at some point. Like everything that you work for could disappear in a moment. Just like it did to us. Your house could get taken, your bank accounts could get seized, the jewelry, the last piece of value that you try to sneak across a border could get ripped off your neck, like what happened to my great-grandma. And so, being raised with these stories, I was instantly drawn to this idea of, oh, you can do something that you can like protect value with that can't be taken. I got to understand this. Mm-hmm. And that started the craziest ride of my life. It was just a series of right place, right time after that. And so I've done like every single legal thing that you can do in crypto at scale because I was just in the right place at the right time with the right friends.
Okay.
And I've been in crypto now. So I guess I first heard about it in 2009. I've been working in it professionally since 2010. So professionally 9 years, like aware of it 10 years. And, I've come to this conclusion that basically the most important thing to watch if you really care about like this space is the one space where it has an advantage, which is censorship-resistant applications, which is the same thing that we both started with, which is the Darknet.
Yep.
Like the Darknet is the most important thing to pay attention to if you're trying to get signal, like leading indicators about whether this stuff is real or not. And I don't think that any other application makes any sense besides censorship resistance.
No one's really talking about dark markets anymore. It's kind of gone quiet. Like, because the thing about the Silk Road is that it was also a very exciting brand. It was a cool story. It's like the Silk Road, the first one. That's more exciting than dark markets as a category. So now the Silk Road's gone. Ross Ulbricht's in jail. there isn't as, I don't know, it's something to get excited about anymore.
Yeah, it's not part of the mimesis. My friend Kevin Zoe, this is the guy who helped me discover Monero before it was called Monero. So I was running this thing called, I should give you my background real quick. Okay, so right time, right place, 2009, 2010, I start buying Bitcoin. And pretty soon, like I'm, like living in these communal nerd mansions in like Cupertino just because I really value intelligent people. Because I myself have been told that I'm like slow, et cetera, my whole life. When I was young in school, I was told I had a learning disability. And so I just always wanted to like figure out how smart people got smart. So I would just always surround myself with smart people. And what started to happen is more and more people were like turning on to this Bitcoin thing, but they didn't know how to buy it. So I was like, oh, I can help here. So I just learned how to buy Bitcoin in the early days. And pretty soon I was like helping. First it was tech founders buy Bitcoin. Then it was angel investors. And then it was venture capitalists buy Bitcoin. And it was in one of these transactions that this VC looked at me and he's like, oh, you have these smart friends. One of them's an early Airbnb employee. One of them is, an early Dropbox employee. One of them is, a very smart technical person. You guys look like a team. Can I give you money? And we're like, sure, we'll take your money. And again, right time, right place, had no idea this was going to happen. But pretty soon we had raised $2.5 million from like Y Combinator and Google Ventures. And it all happened like that. Like we had no idea this was going to happen. This was not our intention. So all of a sudden, like I'm the least qualified person in the room, by the way. Like my friend Bennett, who discovered Bitcoin in 2009, he's brilliant. This early Dropbox founder, very, very savvy guy, very connected guy. And I was really just holding on to their coattails. But that's how the journey started. It was like this accidental introduction to crypto. And then because of that, we ended up starting a regulated Bitcoin exchange called Buttercoin, which unfortunately the timing wasn't there for us, so we had to shut it down in 2015. But going down that regulated financial services route, you learn everything about banks, about compliance, about three-letter agencies and how you must interact with them. You basically learn how to do this internet money thing while also respecting the men with guns. And so you get a very unusual map of the landscape. And then, after I shut that down, I took a couple of years off. I started making, travel vlogs that nobody but my mom watched. And pretty soon, I started making this, people were asking like for internet money stuffs. I started making these private videos. They got popular. These internet money videos blew up where I was just explaining crypto. And, from there, more and more people just kept reaching out, asking like, hey, how do we go further down the rabbit hole? I ended up starting this research group. And, I just try to take everything I learned during that time of trying to raise capital, talking to investors, basically where you have to become a tech historian, understanding how value is created and captured. That's a really important distinction. Like email created a bunch of value, captured none of it. Gmail, on the other hand, sits on top of email, captures tremendous value, right? And so studying that, learning how that works, and just applying that to, internet money. And especially Bitcoin. Bitcoin is one of these things where it's so unintuitive. Just like all tech investing, it's really hard for people to understand how tech works, why it works. Like, most people look at Facebook in the early days and like, this thing is dumb. It makes no sense. I'm not going to invest in it. But if you study tech investing history and you look at all the biggest wins outside of weird situations, outside of like mania situations, there's only one way to reliably make money in tech investing, and it's based on adoption. Is that you have to solve a hair on fire problem that a huge number of people have, that a lot of people are willing to pay for, and if you don't do that, you don't matter. But if you do that, right, and nobody else believes that that's going to happen, if you can be right first about that, then like you can win in like this kind of ridiculous way. And so, when I look at tech investing history and I just apply all of that thinking to crypto, I'm thinking, okay, like where's the only advantage that crypto has? And there's only one place. It's never going to be faster, right? You're never going to like solve as many problems with a distributed system as you will with a centralized system. We can get to those reasons later if you want. So then like what's the advantage of crypto? It's only censorship resistance.
Well, so this is where I'm with you, and I've been trying to find someone who can articulate why Bitcoin matters and why everything else doesn't matter. Why that the latest shills are the nano ones. They're appearing everywhere now, and we've had the Dash shills and we've had the Ripple shills, and they've all talked about better tech and faster tech, blah blah blah. We all know Ethereum has the unstoppable computer, but really it's starting to look very centralized now. And nobody's really using a lot of this stuff. And I think you've articulated it very well. It does come down to censorship resistance. That's the killer app.
That's right.
The killer app is censorship resistance. And, therefore with Bitcoin, it's really important to keep it decentralized. So then the scaling war becomes really kind of simple to understand. It's like, yes, we have to keep nodes, as many people operating nodes as possible. Therefore, we have to keep the block size as small as possible. And all these things kind of start to fall into place. And then you look at the arguments from the morons from BSV or BCH or Ripple, and you just kind of like, you're not fighting for censorship resistance. You're not fighting the same battle.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're totally right. I think, unfortunately, there are many crypto cults, and it's very easy for our human biases to get taken advantage of. This stuff is super counterintuitive, but I think that if you lay out the map of how things work, it's very easy to all come to the exact same conclusion. And so, if you take all of the sound bites that are used by these crypto cults and you actually examine them and you break them apart, a lot of them, they just play to your biases. So, for example, one of the worst biases in internet money is this idea of a unit bias. So a lot of people shy away from Bitcoin because they feel like it's too expensive. And, I can buy like 1,000 of this other thing for like a penny a piece, right? Like, wouldn't I rather have that? It looks cheap, and they confuse the idea of value with a low price, and these are not the same thing. So unfortunately, there are just so many biases that scammers, pumpers use to manipulate people into driving the price of these things up as they pump and dump. And unfortunately, the vast majority of alternative cryptos are just that. There's very few legitimate experiments in crypto. First of all, like full stop. A handful of legitimate experiments that have a Ice Cube's chance in hell of working, right? Like it's so hard. It's so hard to make any tech that people use. It's like 10 times harder to make distributed tech that people use. And when you study tech investing history, what you realize is there tend to be what's called a long tail distribution, where there's one giant winner that's like wins some market, and then the second place is kind of a distant second, and the third place is even further distant third, and it kind of tapers off. And so when you look at like the dark markets, for example, what really shocked me is I was expecting adoption of Monero because I'd been studying Monero for so long.
Course.
And it's not there. Like, here's the thing. Like, we can go through the numbers right now. I have a chart where basically I count all of the vendors like on every available dark market I can find. And I'm like, all right, like how many accept Bitcoin? How many accept all the next coins? And it looks like this. It's like primarily Bitcoin.
Well, so we'll get into that. But one thing I want to ask you before then, just because of what you said previously, I think there's different types of people. There are Bitcoin maximalists who believe in only Bitcoin and everything else is a scam. And then there's Bitcoin maximalists who, it's not that they believe everything else is a scam, but because I'm in this category. I don't believe everyone's trying to scam us. I'm not like from Giacomo Zucco's place. I think some people legitimately believe what they're doing, but maybe are misguided.
Sure.
Okay? And then you get some people who are like, they're Bitcoin maximalists, but they're like, okay, well, I want to see what Zcash is doing because I think that's some interesting technology there, and maybe that can be ported to Bitcoin at some point. And then you get the people who are multi-coiners. I'm definitely I'm now a maximalist. If you show me something else that works, I will give it the time of day. I'll pay attention to it.
Yeah.
I'm going to ignore most things, but I'm not going to call everything a scam because I think it takes away from what a real scam is. But you, based on the research you've done, is there anything that looks even potentially viable outside of Bitcoin?
Yeah, you recently had Balaji Srinivasan, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, and he's pretty closely affiliated with Andreessen Horowitz. Both I respect Balaji and Andreessen Horowitz a lot, and they have a meme that I really like, which is the internet's eating everything. So if the internet's eating everything, the question for us interested in crypto is like, what can crypto legitimately eat where you're going to see adoption? Not a story, not a narrative, but real adoption. And so it really starts with a hair on fire problem. So we know for sure that money is terribly broken. There's so many ways to look at this, and I'd love to share some of those ideas later about some easy metrics about how we can look at how broken the situation is. But beyond that, the question is, okay, so piggy banks. Bitcoin is trying to eat piggy banks, and it's doing an amazing job, by the way. And we can get into the data later, because that's all I do is I look at data of actual adoption. So Bitcoin is already off to a phenomenal start in terms of eating piggy banks. But, what else can internet money eat? And, is Bitcoin in a better position than these other things, whether it's through layer 2 or innovations happening? So, for example, smart contracts, right? Like, is the internet going to eat contracts? If-then statements. If you send money here, then I send you this thing, right? So right now, Ethereum has an insane developer network effect built on it, but it also has a lot of experiments all up in the air all at once. And so the question is, if you look at things like Taproot, right? Like, and you look at some of these outside of Taproot, some of these layer 2 solutions, can you build a smart contract system on Bitcoin? Yeah, it looks like you can. Will that overcome the developer network effects that Ethereum has gained? We'll have to see. But I think that you can track how developers are using this stuff. You can actually count the number of applications and the web traffic going to these applications, and you can just see what the growth rate is over time. And so I think that we get to the best that we can do is name the experiment we're watching and then track the results. And just try to be right first about, hey, is this growth rate accelerating while this other growth rate's falling off? If it is, then I want to bet on the thing that has the highest chance of being that big first place winner.
Right, interesting. Okay. Well, let's do the dark market stuff because that is interesting for me.
Yeah.
So the last time when I was regularly using it, after the Silk Road got closed down, another one popped up. And
Sure.
then maybe 2 or 3 popped up. And what would happen is it would be around for a while and then it would just suddenly go offline
Yep.
and the creator would disappear and do an exit scam. And that was happening every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, since 2016, when I purchased some cannabis oil for my mother's treatment, since then I've never gone near a dark market ever since. So I have got no idea what the state of the market is at the moment. Is there one major player? Are there a few players? Are they really professionalized in better ways? What's going on?
Yeah, we're going to look at 4 of the top dark markets right now. So what I've got here is I'm looking at this dashboard that my group put together that we basically use to stay smart about this stuff. So let's start off with Silk Road 3. So you've got 4 different coins that are accepted on Silk Road 3. Bitcoin is double the second most popular coin. Then let's go over to Berlusconi market. Looks like it's currently experiencing downtime.
Berlusconi.
Uh-huh.
Named after the Italian president.
Is that who it's named after?
Yeah,
That's
Francesco
hilarious.
Berlusconi, isn't it?
So check this out. So it was last active on the 23rd of September. And of 1,000 vendors that we counted, 1,000 accepted Bitcoin. And the next most popular was in the high 200s.
Hold on, when you say it was last active, when?
Yeah, so it's got downtime. So we check these every 2 weeks or so. So it was 23rd of September. It was last active. So these things go up and down all the time.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. And so we're just always tracking them no matter what.
They're not just, there's no sites that are just sat there all day, every day.
Very few.
Okay.
You've got Empire, which has got, this is the 3rd most active one. So yeah, again, same thing. Bitcoin, by far the number 1. The second place, right, is about, say, 60%. And then Canazon, it's all Bitcoin with there's only one other one, which is Monero. But the thing that's so surprising about this is that you would expect privacy coins to be dominating the space. But the funny thing is, Monero, in almost every case, is the last place coin used on these markets. And there's almost no other privacy coins used at all. And this, when I first saw this, I think it was maybe 6 months ago, I was like, what the heck? How is Bitcoin good enough to keep these dark market vendors out of jail? And that's when we discovered CoinJoin. Are you familiar with CoinJoin?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so CoinJoin is the most important thing in the Bitcoin story that very few people are talking about. And the really crazy thing about CoinJoin is there's only one implementation of it that's working in any
Wasabi
wallet.
Yeah.
And so I try to talk to those guys at least once a month. We reverse engineered how they coordinate these coin joins, and so we know everything about them. So we're tracking their growth, which, by the way, their growth is bananas. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in tech. And the really wild thing is, last month, what was it? So we're September now. In October, you had 5 different countries say, and they were sanctioned countries, by the way, talking about they're going to start using crypto. And the month before this, you saw a 2.5 increase in the amount of coins being coin joined, being made fungible. This is worth paying attention to, in my opinion. Like, you have sanctioned countries. These are the people who have the largest incentive to use a censorship-resistant technology like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is by far the most liquid thing, and it's got privacy that's good enough. It's good enough because we discovered this on the dark markets. Like, it's good enough that it's keeping many of the vendors safe, but it also seems to be good enough that government officials may be using it to get positions before they disclose that their government's going to start playing with crypto. So there's no way to know for sure that these dots are connected, but we can look at the numbers. We can see really bizarre increases in use and events, and we can say, hey, are these things connected? And we can keep tracking them over time. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, so first question is, do you have a hypothesis on why Bitcoin is being used and maybe Monero isn't? Because most people would naturally think, use Monero. If you use Monero, you can't be tracked in any way at all. Whereas, Bitcoin you can track in the ledger.
Right.
I mean, I've got a hypothesis, but what's yours?
Well, okay. I'm going to give you a long answer to a short question, but I'm going to try to summarize it. I think there's 3 types of users, and often people only focus on the one that's most like them. So there's speculators, developers, and then the actual users, with the actual users being the most important, but they have a really critical dependency on the developers, and the developers don't really come until you have speculators, right? And so oftentimes people will, if they're speculators, will look at price, which is the worst thing to look at. Developers, probably the best thing to look at is developer network effects, and then the most important of all are user network effects. And so I think it's a combination of just Bitcoin being so much earlier to the dark market scene than anything else from like a speculation perspective. And then it started to accrue these developer network effects where if you're building a dark market, well, Bitcoin's just so liquid because of all the speculators. It's so easy for vendors to move in and out of this, and it's a lot easier for the users, the buyers in these dark markets to acquire it than anything else. And it's, there's other things you can get into like the volatility, et cetera, but liquidity is a big deal.
I was about to say, I think my thesis would be it's liquidity, and it's liquidity outside of KYC exchanges. So if you are trading, buying and selling on dark markets with Monero, you've got to do one of 2 things. You've got to try and sell that Monero for fiat at some point, or you've got to try and transfer it into Bitcoin. Any exchange that accepts Monero is going to have KYC. We don't have options like Shapeshift anymore. So there's going to be something trackable in the exchange of you doing lots of trading with Monero, even if we don't know exactly what's happened, where that Monero's come from. You're going to bring attention to yourself. Whereas I think with Bitcoin, there's a lot more off-exchange liquidity as well. There's people, Bitcoin's problem is when you're doing it on a KYC exchange, but there's people buying and selling Bitcoin for cash in person, off exchanges as well. We know that's happening.
That's how I first, bought my first Bitcoins, with a bag of cash at a Starbucks.
So Bitcoin is king in this place.
It is absolutely king. And here's the important thing. The way that people get tracking wrong all the time is they look at the information now. That's not the way to look at information. It's to look at information over time. Because what you're looking for is growth rates, right? And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, none of the other dark market currencies are making any progress at dethroning Bitcoin. Bitcoin is by far the de facto number 1. And the really bizarre thing is that the number 2, it's basically an abandoned project. If you look at the developer network effects, there's no core commits anymore on this second thing. It's just running on momentum. And I think that the momentum is probably going to run out for these things if they're not getting continuously updated.
In terms of these dark markets, are you tracking what people are buying and selling, the actual goods?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I'm not. Do you think we should?
Well, I'd just be interested to know. But
So would I.
I want to know: is it mainly drugs still? Are people buying and selling weapons? Are they buying and selling identity, pornography? I've got no idea. I remember what was on the Silk Road, which was a variety of things. Some legal, some illegal, some questionable. But I would just be interested in what people are buying with it.
I would be as well. There's a survey called the Global Drug Survey, which, the people are a little biased because they're looking for people reporting about drug use and dark markets. But according to their data, it would suggest that the majority of people who are there to purchase drugs. But again, there is some bias in the survey.
Right, okay. Are you tracking the movement of Bitcoin from the dark markets into CoinJoin?
Well, that's the thing is you don't really know.
You don't know. There's no way of
That's the thing about CoinJoin is it makes everything fungible. So you have a lot of these data analytics providers that are trying to sell regulators a story, and that story is not holding up. And the story is you can track Bitcoin transactions. You can make a green list and a black list. But the reality is that with CoinJoin, you can't, right? Like all Bitcoins are the same, whether they're being used by grandma or a drug dealer, or maybe grandma is a drug dealer. You can't know. And they can be used by sanctioned countries. They can be used by the U.S. government. They can be used by three-letter agencies. And this is kind of the cool thing about Bitcoin is that it was the first technology ever to show us that you could have a system that can't be rigged, where every participant in the game has the exact same rules. Right? You can't have a human make mistakes. You can't have a human get corrupted. It's a totally even playing field. And this is like a really big deal that the world doesn't really understand yet. Where like humans can express themselves and coordinate value without a referee. So it doesn't matter how many guns you have, how many dollars you have, everybody gets the same rules.
Okay. Are you tracking the total spend in dark markets every month?
That's hard to do. So what we do now is pretty simple. We're kind of at the beginning of this. We just go through the number of vendors, and we're like, all right, we're going to count as many vendors as we can, and we're going to see what coins they accept. And we're just going to look at what coins are being accepted. Okay.
Are you seeing a growth in vendors?
It depends on the market's uptime. So, I'm looking at this behind the scenes, so I'm pulling from memory, so it's going to be a little bit hard to give you exact numbers, but we last did an analysis on Darknet Growth about 2 months ago, and what we found is that, first of all, the black market is growing, and second of all, the dark net is also growing. But it kind of makes sense. Like if you zoom out, I'm going to give you kind of an abstraction about how to back into this. What causes black market activity? What's the definition? It's just anything that is not legal.
In your jurisdiction.
In your jurisdiction. So then the question is, what causes that? And the short answer is laws. So are the number of laws increasing or decreasing? And I think we all know intuitively it's like laws are a unidirectional thing. They only grow.
Yeah.
And so by that logic, like it's a pretty safe assumption that the black market will only grow because of the number of laws growing.
Okay. Are there still exit scams with these dark markets? Are we still seeing those?
Oh, you're always going to see exit scams. But this brings us back to this question you asked earlier, which is, are there any applications that make sense besides internet money eating piggy banks or what Bitcoin's doing? And there's one really obvious one in my mind, which is unstoppable websites.
Okay.
So, if you think about what does the lifespan of a dark market look like? Well, it starts off either ideologically or, capitalistically, and then it usually ends with the servers getting shut down and a government message appearing, right? So what happens when you can't shut down these websites anymore, right? What does that look like? And so the thing about internet money is that it cuts out middlemen, right? So you could have a drug market built ideologically because some people feel like it's a public good that cannot be shut down. And so even if you try to shut down the servers, they're distributed. You can't shut down the servers. Even if you find the people who created it, they can't change it in a way that you like. And so this is being worked on by dozens of teams right now with very few making any real progress because it's hard. No one's ever done this before. But that seems like the next most obvious thing to me, and I don't think it'll be built on Bitcoin because you don't want the price of file storage getting conflated with the value of the network.
No. I agree with you there. Okay, that's kind of interesting. There is some work being done by Kim.com at the moment, K.im. I don't know if you've looked into that. That might be relevant to it, but you know his background, right?
Oh, what a crazy story that guy has.
He's an amazing story. So he's building a content monetization system that is built on Bitcoin and Lightning, but I don't actually know what he's doing with this, but that might be something. It's interesting.
I'll have to check that out.
Take a look at it. Okay, so what's your gut feel from this? Are you saying that the indicator for the market and for speculators should be based primarily on the size and the growth of dark markets?
In the short answer is yeah. And can I give you the longer reason as to why? Okay. Why do the dark nets matter? Why should we pay attention to them? And why should we pay attention to them over everything else? Like, why should we stop looking at price? Why should we stop looking at Twitter and Reddit and just focus on the data in these dark markets?
Well, dude, listen, if you're going to go and raise money in Silicon Valley and you're going to put together a deck, you're going to start with, here is the problem, here is the solution. So a dark market, what is the problem? Buying drugs is dangerous. You can get ripped off. You can get poor quality drugs. The solution is a website which has dealers and buyers and sellers rated, a bit like Amazon, and like the methodology is it's done on the dark web and pay with Bitcoin. Like there is a perfect story. A lot of the other use cases for Bitcoin where people are kind of encouraging it, I'm like, I don't really see you solving a problem here. This solves a problem.
Yeah, you're totally right. And what you want to do with any technology. So keep in mind, I come from this world of studying the most successful technologies ever to pitch investors to give me money so I can go do one of these things, right? And so here's the story that they like the tech historians. You want to dominate a small market and you want to scale to larger and larger markets until you've eaten the world, right? So what does scaling for Bitcoin look like in terms of censorship resistance? Well, the last market is governments. So are we seeing governments adopt crypto? And if we are, is it asymmetrically one coin? So yes. Like in, what was it, October? No, sorry. It's October now. In September, we saw 5 different countries. The Ukraine. I don't have the whole list in front of me, but there's
Iran, Venezuela,
there we go.
North Korea.
You're paying attention, yeah. So we had 5 countries make major announcements about, hey, we're going to start using crypto. And then what we see is the month preceding that, this gigantic spike in CoinJoin transactions happening. Is that related? I think it probably is. It's hard to know for sure. But what we do know is that there is a hair on fire problem that sanctioned countries have. And it's not just their problem. It's anybody who wants to interact with these sanctioned countries. They need a way to coordinate resources. That's kind of the whole point of money. And we know that, in the world today, money is so broken for all of these markets, for everyday people like us, but also for countries. And so when you look at the incentives for country adoption of crypto, it's very strong. It's primarily Bitcoin. It looks to be the thing that is the most obvious candidate. But it all hinges on Bitcoin being fungible, on every Bitcoin looking the same, on never having a green list and a black list. And so here's what I'm saying is, if the largest market is governments, do they have a hair on fire problem? Yes, sanctions. Is there a way to get past this hair on fire problem? Yes, crypto. Is there a crypto that is asymmetrically better suited to do that? Yes, Bitcoin. And so you can kind of like go into whatever one of these things you want, but when you lay out the facts objectively, it all comes to the same conclusion. And so then the question is, okay, well, like, why isn't anybody else talking about this? And I think it's something to do with social cues. I think that people just don't like to talk about naughty things. I don't know why. Like, why are so few people talking about the data on the darknet? It's all there for people to look at.
Well, dude, listen. 97% of men watch porn, but they don't talk about it. Like, there are taboos and there are dark and dirty and seedy, horrible parts of the internet of the world that people are intrigued by, but just don't want to talk about. They just don't want to talk about it. That's fact. I mean, with my new show, Defiance, I'm going to be tackling parts of the sex industry because, men consume I think they consume more pornography than they do Hollywood movies, but there is a complete disregard to the health and protection of adult sex workers in the industry. It's just absolute bullshit. People avoid this stuff. You have to try and keep your kind of clean public image of who you are. People just don't like talking about. They like consuming it. Vice. They want to see Vice go into Iraq and North Korea and talk to ISIS. They want to see that, but they don't want to admit that they like it, that they have this perverse curiosity around it.
I think that's the opportunity, though. Like, if you're trying to be right first, then that's an easy way to be right, is to look at the things that other people just don't want to look at or talk about or whatever.
But is Bitcoin here to enable authoritarian regimes who are under sanctions and drug dealers? I mean, I argue the case that with the dark markets it's good, because actually what you're doing is you're providing a safer and better way for people to buy drugs in a system where we know prohibition has failed. So you're doing 2 things. You're providing a better quality product, so less people will overdose, and you are providing it in a safer environment to buy it because it's not on the streets with associated violence, with people being ripped off. That to me is absolutely a better world than we have now. Is it a better world where authoritarian regimes, countries like North Korea, who have sanctions for a reason, who are, they have enslaved their entire population, there are people starving, and they are using this to get around the sanctions? I don't know. Morally, I don't know.
Well, morally, I won't comment on the morality of all this. But here's another way to look at it. Are humans better off if we all have the same rules, where no matter how many guns or dollars you have the same power as everyone else? And I think on balance, yes.
That's equity, right? If you want equity, then yes, of course. We all believe we should be equal. I think we obviously don't all believe that because we have dictators and authoritarian regimes. But I think most of us have that pursuit that we want equality for all.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think that money is a great place to start with that equality, because if you think about what money is, it's just how we coordinate sunlight, right? Like the sun comes down on Earth, it vibrates stuff becomes animate, it starts thinking, it starts making things, and at some point it needs to like coordinate that energy. And so money has become this great way of coordinating energy on a very large scale. But money is very broken today. Like if you go from the smallest level, like, okay, you and I, for example, we're normal everyday people. The question is, for every day that we work, how many days can we take off? Well, if you look at the bell curve of distributions, the average person, the person right in the middle, for every day that they work, they are in debt more than a day. Just like let this sink in for a second. This is a terrible, terrible state. If your measure of money functioning is for every day people work, can they take at least one day off? Right? The fact that we're so far away from that should be a huge red flag to everybody that money today is broken for little people, everyday people, us, right? But then if you look at the extreme other end, right, the largest collections of people, it's also extremely broken for them. And so I think that if we can have fair money, you're going to see some very unusual things happening when the rules are the same for everybody. It's also a little scary, right? Like you and grandma can have the same power as North Korea or the U.S. government. But the neat thing about this is that you have a chance to express yourself here. Like you can hold Bitcoin, and if you do, you are basically making it more scarce. And basic supply-demand economics, you're driving up its value. And if you believe that everybody wants this fair money and that there's like hair-on-fire problems that it can solve, then this is not financial advice, obviously, but I think the move is you just buy Bitcoin because that's the best play on fair money for every level of human, from the individual to the government, like to the country level of human.
Yeah, I guess I agree. I mean, fair money is a great way of putting it, right? Fair money. I don't know. Do I have the same power? I would have thought somebody gets in early who becomes the equivalent of a billionaire, and I think they potentially have a bit more power because they have more Bitcoin and more money in that system, and they can build their citadel and have their guns and defenses that possibly somebody who comes in late can't. So I still think there's going to be different levels of power because money does buy power in some ways.
Well, this is a great point, and a counterpoint to this is Edward Snowden. I mean, look what he did. He's still alive. He's still well. He still has people in his life who love him and that he's able to love. He's able to express himself. So in a way, he did something defiantly that the U.S. government, one of the most powerful governments in the world, didn't like, and he's still okay.
Yeah, it's because he's hiding out in Russia.
Sure, he is a Russian house cat. That's fair. But I want you to think about technology adoption in terms of incremental moves.
Okay.
We are in an era where an Edward Snowden can happen, where you can defy a huge government and still be okay. This is a new thing. Edward Snowden is almost like a government of one. He's like a country of one. He's like the big word is self-sovereign, right? He was able to do something that the men with guns and all the dollars didn't like and be okay. And so this is the beginning of this much larger move where people are getting way more power than they've ever had.
What do you mean by be okay? What do you define as be okay? Because you could say be okay in that he's not been arrested or killed, right? But he's living a very restrictive life in Russia. He can't leave Russia. What are the Russian agents called? The FSB? Is it whoever they are? The equivalent of what the FBI. I'm sure that he has to pass every decision he makes through those guys. So he's okay in terms of he's not been caught by the U.S. government, but there's a lot of restrictions in his life right now. So,
yeah, it's not ideal for sure.
But I understand what you're saying. We live in a very, very strange times as well, whereby I can spin up 2 microphones, make a podcast, and it reaches 100,000 people or 1 million people. That's very strange times. I can pay for stuff anywhere in the world, and no one can stop me. There's lots of weird and strange things happen. It's a really interesting time to be alive. I'm not even sure where I'm going with this.
It's the most fascinating time to be alive because the rate of change is so fast. This is kind of the crazy thing about internet money. Like if you look at technology trends, historically, a new technology hitting mainstream adoption has taken like 10 to 20 years, right? But now that we're all connected, these things that solve real problems can grow quite quickly. And so what I'm saying is like, let's all look at the growth in the one place that matters, even though it's very counterintuitive because nobody likes to talk about dark market stuff unless it's in hushed tones.
Like you said, the killer use case is censorship-resistant money. This is a use case for censorship-resistant money. Are there other use cases that you've looked into? So governments and sanctions is one, the dark markets. Are there others?
Well, here's the question is like, where are people censored where they don't want to be?
Sex workers.
Yeah, that's a great one. So you could have things like identity, right? Unfortunately, I haven't seen any real censorship-resistant approaches to identity. I was really hopeful that there would be some, but it's hard, and I don't see anybody working on that problem in a meaningful way. We talked about file storage. I think that's a very obvious one. In Venezuela, the website that lists the currency conversion rate just keeps getting taken down, right? People want this information. Publishers want to share it. So that seems like a very obvious one. But it's really a question of where does censorship happen? And then you will see these censorship-resistant technologies emerge in order to support this. And it's going to be built on whatever is the easiest tool to use. So if Bitcoin becomes that, it'll be on Bitcoin. I don't think that for file storage it's going to happen there. Identity maybe. Yeah, but I think file storage is going to have its own network. And none of the live projects today, in my mind, can make unstoppable websites possible. But there are lots of experiments happening in that space.
Okay. So do you think it's a little bit of a red herring, a lot of the work to for example, Roger Ver is always trying to get people to consider Bitcoin Cash as money, to be using it for payments and transactions. That's his difference from Bitcoin. Is this all like a red herring? Trying to get people to use Bitcoin as money, as cash day to day for things that don't require censorship resistance, your cup of coffee, buying a laptop. Is that a nonsense?
It's a nonsense.
It's a nonsense.
And here's why it's a nonsense. There's two reasons. One, if you just understand how a checking account works, right? Let's say that you are going from dollars to Chuck E. Cheese tokens back to dollars, right? And you only want Chuck E. Cheese tokens to play skee ball. That's it, right? Like, okay, I can play skee ball with Chuck E. Cheese tokens, but then if I'm not playing skee ball, I want dollars. The demand, right, for these Chuck E. Cheese coins, right, and the supply, basically you take out a supply as you have the demand to play skee ball, but then you go right back into dollars. You're not holding your money in Chuck E. Cheese coins, right? So like anything that is used for a transaction, it creates a short-term increase, right, in the demand, a short-term decrease in the supply, but then it flips. And so unless there's a reason to hodl, unless there's a reason to hold this thing long-term, there's no upward price pressure created by a checking account application.
Okay, so I think what we're actually getting to the point here is, taking a step further. So censorship resistance is obviously important, but it's all about creating your own rules. It's the rules of what you want to do. So, for example, people will use Bitcoin to avoid tax because they don't agree with paying tax or they just don't want to. And they're like, fuck you, I'm just not going to pay it. And they're going to hide money in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is for censorship-resistant purchases. It's a way of hiding wealth, I guess. It's a way of avoiding sanctions. It's just, I guess it's an open market for your own decisions.
Yeah, that's
the way you
right.
want to live your life.
So first of all, I would always encourage you to follow all the laws and to never anger the men with guns because they got guns and cages. And you don't want to be in a cage and you don't want to be looking down the barrel of a gun. So follow all the rules because, the men with guns are in charge. But that being said, here's the question. Are people going to want to express themselves in a way that their government may not like?
Uh-huh.
I think we can all say obviously yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do some of these people have hair on fire problems where they must express themselves? Obviously, yes.
Yes.
In Venezuela, if you're starving to death, you need to buy some black market bread, and your family sends you Bitcoin, are you going to use that Bitcoin to buy that black market bread? Well, yes, obviously, because the alternative is you starving to death.
Yep.
If you've got wealth in China and the regime changes and now like this new regime is trying to take all your treasure, are you going to try to get it out with whatever means you can? And is crypto and specifically Bitcoin like unusually well suited for this? Well, yes. So obviously people are going to use it. And when you take a survey of what's going on around the world in terms of capital controls, in terms of censorship, it's just so obvious that there is a gigantic market for this technology, and it's only growing because of the simple reason that the number of laws only grows.
Right, so privacy is going to become increasingly important on Bitcoin. So are you looking at the work that developers are doing on privacy? What's the most interesting areas? What do you think needs to be pursued?
Yeah, this is a little scary, to be honest. This is the paradox. So Bitcoin today is the most obvious way that you can have private internet money transactions. But it's all dependent on one technology called CoinJoin, and all CoinJoin transactions happen through one service, which is called Wasabi Wallet. So it's both great that it exists, but it's terrifying that there's no other CoinJoin thing that's working out there. So if anybody's listening to this who's a developer, you should absolutely work on Bitcoin privacy because we're at a really precarious place right now. And I haven't seen any compelling developments here. The guy who created Wasabi Wallet, he actually won an award for using CoinJoin and for taking CoinJoin to the next level. And he actually is no longer working on Wasabi Wallet. He's primarily doing research to try to figure out if there's any other way to have legit Bitcoin privacy. And I suspect the reason I'm speculating here is because he realizes having a centralized place that enables this makes them a target. Right? Makes you a huge target. And if all of Bitcoin is dependent, right, the whole success is dependent on this one service working, it's a little bit scary, right? We have an existential risk. And so Bitcoin privacy is the most important thing for Bitcoin, for maybe the future of free money and fair money. And we don't have any good answers right now for how that happens.
Have you considered on-chain privacy and the risk associated with not being able to fully verify the hard cap? And have you looked at the different privacy technologies that are being worked on, and do you have any preferences?
Yeah, there are some technical issues when you think about making things more private online. There's a set of trade-offs that are a little scary one way or another. One that you alluded to is, you could do it one way where you're not actually sure if double spends ever happen, which, is kind of I don't think we want that because we kind of want to keep everybody in check, right? I haven't seen any good solutions for on-chain privacy.
What about Lightning then? Where are you with Lightning?
Hey, respect to everybody who's working on Lightning. I follow Elizabeth Stark on Twitter. I think she's super cool.
Got the conference this weekend in Berlin.
Cool. Honestly, I think that Lightning is very important, but not for the reasons everybody thinks.
Okay.
I don't think that Lightning will have a real impact on the value of Bitcoin. However, I think that showing that a layer 2 solution can be built and works is so undervalued. Because if we can do smart contracts on top of Bitcoin, if we can do privacy on top of Bitcoin, all via these layer 2 solutions, game changer. And so, in a sense, even if Lightning doesn't matter for the reason that everybody thinks, it's super important to the future of Bitcoin for the reason that nobody thinks, that these layer 2 solutions may actually be the way that Bitcoin literally eats all of the applications.
Talk me through that. Why?
Okay, so here's the big thinking. If you have this base layer protocol where you're basically for sure that something has happened, even if the people you're coordinating with, if you don't know them or trust them. That's the whole core innovation behind Bitcoin that is really a lot of people don't understand this. Bitcoin is what? Well, at its most basic level, it is just a clock. But it doesn't run on normal time. It runs on block time. And it lets you know, okay, Alice had the money first. Then the money left Alice and it went to Bob. And Alice and Bob don't need to know each other, trust each other. There's no referee in between them. This is a huge deal. And this basic idea of being able to rely on information without knowing or trusting people, the market for this is ginormous. You can find the need for this in contracts. You can find it in file storage. You can find it in money. And so all of this, right, all of these applications that require coordination without trust, they can all be built layer 2 on top of Bitcoin. And so the market for Bitcoin could be way bigger. It's the number is so silly it's hard to even say with a straight face. But I mean, you're talking quadrillions of dollars of value, which I know is it's a wacky thing to say, but think about it this way. The value of all contracts today is a quarter of a quadrillion dollars. $250 trillion. That number is so gigantic. Now think about this. Can technology extend what contracts today can do? Well, obviously, anybody who's spent a minute in fintech can tell you that today's contracts are severely broken and terrible. Now, if you can take that base layer of Bitcoin and you can make contracts on top of that, not only could that technology eat existing contracts, but it could dramatically grow the value of what these contracts can do.
So you're talking about thinking about Bitcoin in a way almost entirely different from anyone else I spoke to recently.
I'm a little bit of a hermit, and so that helps.
Well, because do you know, I think what it is people are looking for the next level of adoption, and I just think they're starting to think in terms of like, what's the natural next level of adoption? It is people buying and selling stuff on Lightning with their Bitcoin, and it's maybe doing more remittance, and it's speculators from institutions coming in. But you're actually going back to the core properties of what Bitcoin is and why it was designed.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that just makes the most sense. It's like,
of course, but it's just that's not the conversation that's happening right now.
I don't know why, but I'm going to take full advantage of it.
You should.
I'm going to basically say, hey, everybody, I think we should all pay attention to the dark markets and censorship-resistant applications. And I think I'm going to be right. I think I'm going to be right in a really big way. And then I'm going to hopefully use that social capital to, say, hey, here are other important things. We should point our brain juice at this, whether it's connecting all of our cities with really good engineering like what Elon Musk is doing, whether it's like the Boring Company or the Hyperloop or rockets. I just wanted to try to make a really good map of reality, share it with people, get a little bit of momentum around like having conversations that might be taboo, just like having real talk. And if we can do that, I think that our collective future is a lot brighter.
Let me tell you where my head is at the moment as well. Obviously, I've launched this other show, Defiance. So as I've gone away from cryptos and more into just Bitcoin, just having a focus on Bitcoin, I stopped thinking of the crypto space and even the Bitcoin space. And I'm starting to think more of the anarchist space, the censorship resistant space, the defiance space, like the place where people are trying to take control of their life, the rules they want to live by. They want to become self-sovereign in terms, not just in terms of money, but like in terms of their own defense. There's a rejection of the state. I'm thinking that's a space of which Bitcoin is part of, rather than this like very strange crypto industry, which I think is just mainly bullshit. Do you have that gut feeling at all? Do you think about that?
It's not just a gut feeling. I mean, look at all the data. Okay, so let's look at a trend that we're at the very beginning of. Countries exiting. So Brexit happened. Mm-hmm. If you were to survey people 5 years before Brexit happening, how many people, what percentage of a population would say that Brexit was going to happen? Probably pretty small.
Well, we didn't think it was going to happen when it did.
Right.
Everything was pointing towards the Remain vote winning.
Now, let's look at a guest that you recently had on, Balaji Srinivasan. Mm-hmm. This guy, I don't know if he has a crystal ball or what it is, but he predicted Brexit. He predicted it way before. I think it was somewhere between 5 and 8 years ago. He had this talk called Silicon Valley's Ultimate Exit, which have you listened to this yet?
That's so funny you should say that, because somebody pointed me to the article yesterday, and have I got it still open? Or did I put it as a bookmark? Let me see. Yeah, literally, it's my bookmark from yesterday.
Nice.
It's up here.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. I can't remember who shared it out. Yeah, Silicon Valley's Ultimate Exit on Genius.
You should absolutely listen to it, and here's why. So Balaji makes the case.
It was on. It's on. Remember Rap Genius?
Of course.
It's Genius now, so it's anything, right?
Oh, cool.
So people are obviously uploading interviews there to comment on.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and that didn't cross my mind. It's a bit like SoundCloud we're doing. Okay,
cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll listen to this.
So the reason that this is so not only valuable, but is very topical, is that what Balaji calls out is that technology enabled a new trend, which is exit. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a crappy relationship, you can leave that relationship. You can break up with that crappy person. Well, with governments, you didn't really have much of an option to break up with a government besides leaving the country. Immigration. That's how you used to break up with a crappy situation, a crappy government, a crappy country, whatever you felt was wrong, you could leave the country. But now, with technology, you're able to leave just parts of the country, right? So you can leave like the country's money, for example. And this doesn't happen overnight all at once. This happens in little tiny increments. And sometimes these increments can be so small that you don't pay attention to them until suddenly they're everywhere all at once. And this is called an inflection point. So, for example, when Tesla first came out with the Roadster, oh, look at that cute toy.
Yeah.
But now you can't walk around LA without seeing more Teslas than you can count.
It's unreal. It's unreal how many you see here.
And this is adoption over time. Now, the funny thing is Teslas aren't mainstream, but you wouldn't know that because they're so prevalent, right? So if you think about like how many cars get made in a year and what percentage of those are Teslas, it's still very, very small. And so this is the funny thing about Bitcoin is that just like the Tesla, right, is like still so early in the adoption curve. They haven't even hit their inflection point yet. Like if they are to go mainstream and become like the most dominant car, they still have a lot of growth to do. And there's a lot of value to be captured in that. And the same is true of crypto and asymmetrically Bitcoin, in my opinion, not financial advice, because we're so stupid early in the adoption of this thing, if it's going to go mainstream, that it's just silly. You know, a lot of people, they have this bias. I call it the I missed the boat bias, where if you see something you haven't seen before, your bias is, oh, that can only happen once, even if you don't understand how it works. But if you understand how this stuff works, if Bitcoin is to go mainstream, oh my goodness, the path from here to there is going to be the weirdest thing that we have ever seen, in my opinion, in terms of like value creation, in the amount of fairness it'll bring to people, in the amount of things like people potentially exiting their countries, which was never really possible before. You already see people from China bringing money over via Bitcoin. You already see people leaving India, you know, using Bitcoin as a way to like avoid capital controls. Venezuela, I mean, the list is going on and on and on. And so, you know, going back to this bigger trend that we're talking about country exit, it starts with countries getting smaller. Like look at California. California is the 6th largest economy in the world, but right, like it's paying an asymmetric amount of federal tax to support the rest of the U.S. And you've got this concentration of tech companies in California, right? And at some point, as automation keeps happening, you know, we already have about 40% of all working age Americans not working. As that gets worse, as automation continues to increase, like what happens to the pressure of those few people providing most of the resources for everybody else? Well, at some point there's a breaking point. And at some point you're going to have your Cali exit. And, you know, some of the people who participate in the Cali exit will want to go even further. I mean, here's the thing about humans is humans don't like responsibility in aggregate. We don't. That's why we like leaders. Often we like people to tell us what to do, how to minimize risk. But this isn't true of everybody. You know, you've got a few people, like one out of every so many people, I don't know if it's 100, 1,000, but it's rare, that really wants control and is willing to take the responsibility for that control. And, you know, in the early days of a technology, it's not easy to use it, right? And that's where Bitcoin is today. Bitcoin is not easy to use. Oh my God. Think about Bitcoin like security.
Yeah.
Oh my dear God. How complicated is Bitcoin security? It's a friggin' nightmare.
And you know, I bitch about it all the time, and sometimes I go two ways. I was like, we've got to make this easier so everyone can use it and it's fair for everyone. And then I listened to Janine on Tales from the Crypt saying, you know, Bitcoin was better when there was poor UX because it really came down to like the techies and the nerds using it in the right way and protecting it. And I really like, what's the trade-off here? What's the right balance?
Well, I think this comes back to the other bias we have, which is it's actually a time thing, that over time the tools will get better. And it's actually an indicator of how early we are. And the fact that like we're not near mainstream because the tools don't make it usable for the mainstream, right? But we're getting there. Bit by bit, improvement by improvement, we are getting there.
All right, well, listen, look, you've done all this research, you've looked at all this data, you've obviously got a perspective on the market. As a way of closing out, where's your head at with all this? Like, where is this leading you? Like, what are the conclusions you're coming to in your head, both in terms of where Bitcoin is, where society is, and where the direction that you're going to be taking over the next few years? Because you're going to want to capture value from this change in the markets.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, like, real talk, I am interested in internet money because I believe that it will make me better off. It will give me more free time to spend doing what I love with the people I love.
Yeah,
that's the reason that I like.
Well, we all want that with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I think we've all come to appreciate time. Literally, the show going live today, I've got with Paul Pooey. The title of the show is Time Preference, where we're talking about time preference. Something I've realized over this last couple of years is a really important thing.
Yeah. So here's how I see the world. Jobs are going away.
Yep.
Universal basic income is. I would bet everything I own on that happening. The thing that's scary is the transition from here to there. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so I would rather be in a good position to make that bridge comfortably. And I see crypto and Bitcoin asymmetrically like as the best way to do that, to survive that transition.
Okay. All right. So chance to do a shout out for you. Like, how do people follow your work, Cedric? Like, tell them where to find you, where to find the company, where to find the research, how they interact with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you can find us over at the 1000X group. Just go to 1000x.group. That's just the numbers 1000 and then x.group. We do research on the stuff that nobody else wants to talk about, that nobody else wants to look at. We just do real talk. We try to understand network effects, user network effects, developer network effects, speculator network effects, and we just look for leading indicators. We look for real talk that we look for data, hard data, and we try to make sense of it using all the patterns that we've learned from venture capitalists over the last 50 years. And so we just stand on the shoulders of those giants and do our best to understand the difference between what's really happening and the stories that you hear on Reddit, Twitter, etc.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, look, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. Hopefully I'll get to know you better now. Now we've met in person and we'll get to hang out a bit and grab a beer sometime and talk about dark markets.
Absolutely.
All right, my man. Good luck with everything.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so what did you make of that? Did you enjoy that as much as I did? So big thanks to Cedric for reaching out, sending me the data up front and scheduling the interview with me, because I really enjoyed it. Dark markets are not something that I've thought about for quite a while, and I've not seen discussed too much in Bitcoin circles, and I can understand why, but when the mainstream media does pick up on Bitcoin, it is usually one or two things. It's price, whether it's up or down, or people using it to do illegal things, which is a very clear use case for Bitcoin. It is censorship-resistant money, and Bitcoin doesn't care about morality or if a transaction is good or bad. So it's an interesting part of the market that I think it's useful to get more data from. So yes, thanks again, Cedric. I did enjoy that. If you enjoyed it and you do have any questions, you can always reach out to me. If you are working in dark markets, if you've got other interesting data about dark markets, I definitely want to hear more about it. So do feel free to reach out to me. Massive thanks also to everyone who supports the show. This one and my other show, Defiance, it literally is not something I can do without the sponsors and the listeners and every one of you who contributes in some way or another. If you do want to help, if you're a regular listener and you think, God, I've never done anything, well, firstly, just listen to the ads. But beyond that, a review on iTunes really helps. But anything, it's all listed up on my website. Just head over to whatbitcoindid.com, click on the support section. As I mentioned, I am back out to the States on Wednesday. I'm trying to hit as many cities as possible. I've got so many interviews I want to do. I want to get a good build-up ready for the end of the year. So I'm flying out to New York on Wednesday. I will be hopefully going to Boston, Ohio, Indianapolis, San Francisco, LA, Hawaii, Texas, and Washington. New Zealand isn't going to happen on this trip, but I will hopefully be getting out there at some point. As soon as I know, I will let you know. Anyway, have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you soon.